And here we are once again. We are together, which indicates that it must be Monday. So happy Monday, people. Wishing everybody a great week to come. Let's start out with emotional blackmail. Have you ever been emotionally blackmailed? I have. Years ago, I was emotionally blackmailed by my niece. She wanted me to take her to the Justin Bieber concert. My initial reaction was there is no freaking way that I am going to see Justin Bieber. But she cried and she put on a pouty face and sad puppy dog eyes. And really, I had no choice. I mean, this was the most important thing to her at the time. So I took her to Justin Bieber. By the way, we have a guest here today. It's Gary. I didn't introduce him because nobody could see his face. So, Gary, say hello.
Hi, everybody.
All right, Gary. So really, I'm telling you this story. I forgot you were there myself. So I took her to the Justin Bieber show. We drove into the city. It was in the Garden. And Gary, if I tell you, it was probably the worst experience of my life. I know that sounds weird. I'm the child of divorce. My father passed when he was young. I've lost grandparents and all kinds of mishaps. Anything that happens in life. This might have been the worst single evening. It was that bad. But the reason I bring it up is because I was dreading it. I had been dreading it before, and I've dreaded many, many things in my lifetime. And this was one of the only times where the actual event was as bad or worse than the anticipation. And I think there's something instructive there. We've all been to college, or many of us have. We've all faced new situations. We've all had that feeling of dread. And usually it hangs out like kind of in our chest, in our stomach. And it's like, we don't even know if we can do it because it's just going to be more horrible than we can bear. But Gary, let me ask you this. And just so everyone knows, I sometimes call you Gary the Guru because I turn to you when I need wisdom.
Right.
Is it ever as bad as it seems?
Well, that's the question that I am stuck in. I tend to, in the last couple of years, I have sort of convinced myself that we're in this horrible cycle, like that we're ready for Noah to show up and build an ark and have us go on the ark 2 by 2 to save the world. And I'm not sure. I can humbly offer this up to whoever's listening and would love some feedback. I'm wondering if my subjective view of things is too self-centered and too subjective, and that society has lived through chaotic periods before and has always somehow carried on. So in answer to your question, I'm really not sure how bad things are, although to me, they look pretty bad.
We're going to have to change your name then. This has been, by the way, a sort of a theme this summer. I mean, I have this point of view that says that the only reason people aren't freaking out more now is that it's the summer and people are distracted and thinking about the beach and their vacations, etc. And as soon as the summer is over, we are going to focus and pay attention more on what is happening out there. I lost Gary for a second. Hopefully he'll come back. And so this is ultimately the question. And when Gary comes back, hopefully he does, we're going to talk about how do you know how bad it is? Ultimately, it comes down to epistemology, which is a big fancy word for the school of thought that says, how do we know things? Do we know things based on our personal experience? Do we know things based on the experience of others? Do we know things based on instruments and data? How do we really know? It's such a subjective call about how bad things are at any one time. But we're told that right now we are going through a moment that, depending on who you ask, is either apocalyptic or it's another bad time. things do tend to go in cycles. What was bad once before, turns around, right? The wheel generally turns and things get better. This seems like it's been kind of extended, and some of the circumstances have changed. Now, I'm talking about, of course, what's happening in the world, but yet there are individuals who are thriving in certain ways. It might not be everyone's experience. The thing is that now what's changed is we are all so connected to whatever major narrative is being pumped out. Even if we try to disconnect from it, even if we try to be less aware of these larger stories, right? These larger narratives that are going on in the world, it's hard because, let's see. Welcome back, Gary.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, good. I've heard everything you said.
You are a disembodied voice, which eventually we will all be. But yeah, so I was saying one of the major differences now is that it's hard to disconnect from the larger narratives that are out there. And these larger narratives tend to be either apocalyptic or presented in a way that would make one think that they're apocalyptic. So what are your thoughts about that?
You're asking Gary?
I'm asking Gary. Oh, yeah. No, I'm not asking the general public. I'm asking Gary.
Give me the question again.
Well, it was a pretty vague question, right? Because you came back and I didn't want you to just have to sit there and listen to me like a lump. I wanted you to participate. So it was pretty just vague and generalized. Like, what are your thoughts about the fact that it can be hard to judge exactly the magnitude of a situation, how good or bad it is, because we're also connected to these media, and half of them are, or more than half, are bent on convincing us that we are in an apocalyptic age?
Okay, I will attempt to actually answer your question without generalizing. When I look at the scene clearly, I see 5 factors, very specific factors, that are causing a deterioration in the culture. The most obvious and the most immediately dangerous is the volume of drugs and alcohol that are being consumed. There is no question that the intake of drugs, medical drugs, what used to be called street drugs, psychiatric drugs, and alcohol, and that includes people who really drink a lot of beer and a lot of wine. There's no doubt that impacts individuals, and the amount, the volume of consumption is mind-boggling. So,
but Gary, let me stop you here for a moment, because you are telling us that this is one of the factors that makes things seem very bad and very dangerous. But these drugs and alcohol, I mean, their whole purpose is to make things better, or at least make the perception of things better. So it's very confusing, because this is a purported solution.
Okay, so let me make 2 points. One is, if you were an enemy country, and I'm not naming one, but if you were an enemy country and you were very patient and very strategic, and you had 25 to 50 years of perspective on bringing your enemy down, what better way than to drug the future leadership pool of your enemy? What better way than to slow down his reaction time, to make things seem less urgent, to alter perception, to reduce perception, to scramble the mind just a little bit. And it would seem like a very clear way to do that would be by the strategic and clever introduction of massive drug and alcohol use into the enemy country.
Understood. May I ask you this? Where is the use of these kind of substances today compared to 25 or 50 years ago? Because it seems like this has always been a problem.
You know, throughout history, there has been some organic use of alcohol and drugs. People brewed their own beer. Wine was, and alcohol was distilled. There are various societies that did use drugs, but it's only in the last century that the volume has been ramped up to astronomical levels by corporate entities. The amount of marketing that occurs for alcohol alone, the amount of marketing that occurs for wine alone, the amount of marketing that occurs for cocktails alone is massive, and the amount of consumption is 1,000 times more than it used to be.
Literally?
Literally.
Or are you being hyperbolic?
I'm not being hyperbolic. One would only have to go to, Yahoo Finance or Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal or whatever financial research resources are available on the web to find out how much, what the gross sales, both by unit and dollar amount, these companies cumulatively are selling. The amounts are staggering. Like, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. So you look at the US government, or you say the Congress is not functioning, or you say the school system is not functioning, or the universities are not producing the kind of graduates we need, or we look at Boeing and, look at a company that we expect to have aircraft flying safely, and we never include in our thinking or in our analysis or our criticism that there might be people in those groups that are drinking too much or smoking pot, or now the latest madness is microdosing. So we're not including this gigantic factor of drug and alcohol use when we look at these institutions. And
But Gary, I have
factors, by the way.
I have to point out that for a child of the 60s, you're sounding awful prudish.
Yes, I'm a child of the 60s, and I have involved myself in various disciplines so that I have not used any drugs since the 60s. And I have used the alternative of making myself more alert and more aware by other means. So, we were conned in the 60s. We were introduced to drugs. There were motives behind the introduction. There, if nothing else, financial. And, when you look at it objectively, the message being sent is that you need some kind of a chemical to help you cope with life or become more aware or to deal with your problems. In other words, somebody's saying that you ingest this chemical, whether it be alcohol or some other compounded chemical, in order to deal with life. And that, at its very basic, the basic axiom of that message is that you can't handle life by yourself, and you don't have the tools with which to confront it. Now, I'm not being a prude here. I do understand that sometimes somebody comes home from work and just feels like having a drink to relax, or I think probably smoke a joint, if that's the current vernacular, the current description of pot. And, a person would find some relief. But we're talking about a massive $1 trillion industry that's keeping and encouraging the whole country to use drugs.
You know, it's interesting the way you frame it, Gary, because it's not news that the actual substances themselves can be dangerous, at least in excess, right? I mean, you know, it's an irony that the alcohol companies have to put warnings on their bottles, and they'll sponsor Alcoholic Anonymous and whatever PR bullshit that is to make them seem like they just want us to do it on occasion to enhance experience. But one of the things that you said, at least implied, was that the messaging of the drugs is possibly as bad or worse than the drugs themselves. The message that we need chemical substances to get through, that we are not really enough by ourselves.
Right. So
what effect is that having on the populace?
Well, let's just get down and dirty here. We're talking about an industry. If we combine alcohol, psychotropic drugs, and so-called street drugs, and now some of them are legal, we're talking about an industry that's literally in the hundreds of billions of dollars yearly. Do you think that those people running that kind of enterprise are not hiring and spending an incredible amount of money on public relations and marketing?
I have no doubt that they are, Gary, but
we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars pushing this very message.
But that's the question. Hold on. I don't think you can hear me and that's why we're talking over.
I can. I just love to interrupt.
Oh, you don't interrupt the host, Gary. Everyone knows this. So based on their research, and these people are experts, and these are the greatest businessmen in the world. I will absolutely grant that.
Yeah.
But you're saying that for them to be as successful as they want to be, they have to pound home that message that we are inadequate. And that even absent the solution of the substances, that message itself being pounded home all day, every day, is degrading.
Absolutely.
It's a mind-boggling thought.
Yes. It's saying to some degree that you are the effect of life. You are not in control of, you're not capable of controlling your life without the ingestion of some chemical. Now, that chemical has a broad range. It could be a lovely, sophisticated cocktail at a nice restaurant. It could be some cannabis. I guess that's the way you say it now. Now we have startups that are saying it could be with sophisticated microdosing, but the message is the same. You cannot confront, handle, enjoy, and explore life and higher states of awareness without the ingestion of alcohol or chemicals. And that is one messed up message. But back to my original point, we're not including that when we look at the Congress, this dysfunctional institution. We're not looking at the fact, or I don't know the data, we're not looking at,
for example, the leaders.
How many senators or congressmen are either drinking a lot, smoking pot, taking psychotropic drugs, or because of their age are on heavy medications for medical symptoms.
Are you implying that there are people who are past their prime in our government?
Yes, but the point is, even the people who are not past their prime are most likely imbibing, either in alcohol or cannabis or psychotropic drugs.
Right.
Now you don't have the hard data. What I'm saying to you is that we're just excluding that elephant in the room when we say, oh, this institution is not functioning. Well, maybe it's not functioning because too much chemical too many drugs or too much alcohol is being consumed.
Yeah, you can't just put out a hypothesis like that without actually knowing something. What do you know? Do you have any actual data on that?
I deal with individuals. For the last 50 years, my profession has been to consult or counsel individuals. So, as a sampling, I know for a fact, anecdotally, but with a reasonable amount of arithmetic involved, that there's a huge amount of drug use in every segment of the population. As a for instance, I was helping with a high school teenager, and I just happened to mention, what percentage of kids in your high school smoke pot? And he just laughed at me. He said, basically, everybody.
Yeah, what percentage don't?
Yeah, I mean, so, and then, I can literally recall conversations with 50 different people over the last 10 years who told me that there were people in their family who got hooked on opioids through a medical sort of, a medical channel. Well, not always. Actually, some of them just were partying. So I do know anecdotally that lots of drug use occurs. And why would I assume, it's almost a better question, why would you assume that the Congress would be an odd man out on drinking alone or psychiatric drugs? I mean, I
think it's a fair conclusion. Let me say this. We did start out, and if anyone is just tuning in now, we did start out talking about the danger or the perception of danger in our environment. How bad is it really? Somehow we kind of pivoted to drugs. Gary, is this more a matter in your mind of how it's affecting the perception of how bad things are, or the reality that things are in fact bad right now?
No, it's the reality, because I tend to be optimistic, and I go, you know what? We can get through this. We've experienced rough patches before in history.
We have.
Then I look at this factor, and that is simply the amount of consumption of drugs or alcohol compared to times in the past. And that makes me go, oh my God, maybe this time is different. Now that's
let me throw something else at you.
That's one of 5 areas.
We might not get to all 5, but I want to throw something else at you. That when we're talking about things that alter the mind, and I had already mentioned the advent or the ubiquity of media and social media, that affects the brain, the human organism, like a drug, does it not?
Wait, say that again?
Media and social media, all these things being pumped into us every day, as we have our faces in screens, however many hours a day, doesn't that affect the brain like a drug? Isn't that in fact a drug at this point?
Well, absolutely, but it's a different subject.
Is it?
Yes,
we're talking about things that alter perception.
Well, yeah, I'm not arguing. I mean, for sure, but it's a different little soapbox I would get on. This drug thing is purely chemical and causes physical reactions. The media thing, which is huge and enslaving, and it's probably more dangerous than drugs at this point, because people
I agree,
because of the amount of exposure to screens that, the classic picture of everybody in the room sitting and staring at their iPhone. So yes, but it's a separate subject. Is really
you're saying it's a separate subject. As I think about it, qualitatively, other than the fact that it's not an actual substance, qualitatively, it's altering the mind and perception. It's addictive. I am not sure that this is not the new big drug that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, you're probably right. I actually, that's a pivot, but it's a very good point. And again, it's kind of one of those factors that takes my optimism and turns it into an, oh my God, this has never been before. The availability, just the volume of inflow from the media that's available on our laptops and our cell phones has never existed in even it's incomparable, the change in magnitude. So it's huge. I will tell you that. The thing that gets me, and again, this is based on my experience and my training, is that there is a greed factor and a clinical, a coldness or a calculating aspect to employing algorithms, both, on the web. So not only is it dangerous in itself, but there are characters who are manipulating this for whatever horrible reason. And that's a factor too that can get me going, into a whole ramble about the dangers to society.
Well, let me say this.
With your point,
for the most part, it's probably a fact that you're not going to convince people to do something that is not in their financial interest. So people who are in that industry and who are, thriving, at least financially, it's very difficult to convince them not to. Now, having said that, and we are talking about these things that kind of make us go from hopeful beings to not so much. This was something I was going to discuss after, but I want to insert it now because I took the time in preparing for this to write out a list of songs with the theme everything is going to be all right. Things are going to get better. Right. So I only have 4 of them. People can make recommendations on a 5th, but here's what I have right now. I have Bob Marley's everything's going to be all right. Don't worry because every little thing is going to be all right.
Right.
I have the song All Right Now. Remember that one, Gary?
No.
It's more of a seduction song. I think the group was named Free, but the lyrics are all right now, baby, it's all right now.
I vaguely do, but you have to remember how old I am. Go ahead. And the other 2?
This is, I think, from the 70s. So the other 2 I have, one is from the 80s by a man named Howard Jones. It's called Things Can Only Get Better.
Okay.
And then lastly, an absolute classic by the Beatles, Here Comes the Sun.
And Good Day Sunshine is another one.
Good Day Sunshine. Hey, very well done. That's our 5th.
That was my favorite song ever.
So it begs the question, Gary. So we are talking, and we haven't even gotten deep into it, right? You said that there were 5 things, 5 kind of pillars of the impending apocalypse. But where do we find the hope, Gary?
That's a loaded question because you know me and you know what I do.
Answer it.
There are solutions in each of the 5 areas that are very simple, very logical. They'll take some work to get to explain and put into use, but there are terrific solutions in each one of the 5 areas. There are solutions in the drug area.
Let's start off this way, though. I was not talking about solutions that might take some time. I'm talking about this concept, this thing called hope, without which it's not worth it to go on, without which people wither and die. Where do we find, forget about larger solutions, where do we first look for and seek and understand that there's the possibility of something being better. Where have we done that in the past, Gary? I mean, you were around in '68. You were around in '63 when the president was shot. So where do we start?
Well, I'm going to start with a different kind of comparison. The history question I'd have to look at, although when the founding fathers showed up, that's an example of a miracle occurring on a group or political level. But if you go to a doctor, and a good physician will isolate the factor that's causing the problem.
Fair enough.
And by isolating and defining the factor and showing it to you and explaining what that does, and then giving a remedy for that specific factor that will increase health, that's the way to go about it.
So it starts out with understanding.
Yes. So, yes, exactly. So an enlightenment of, hey, this is what's going on. It's very specific. It's not a big generality like all people are bad or all politicians are bad or this or all the policemen are bad. It's nothing like that. This is affecting people. And here's how you fix it. If you define these things clearly, explain them clearly, and offer a sensible solution, then hope is restored. At least I would think so. And I'm biased because I know how strong and effective and common sense based the solutions are.
Okay. So are we talking about, well, first of all, if we're going to understand the problem or problems, is this a problem of individuals or is this a problem of groups? Is this a problem of government? We're talking about, the insanity that's happening out there, which I think most of us, who are just a little bit introspective will admit is affecting us at some level. I mean, hell, we just had an assassination attempt.
Right.
So we are being affected by these larger narratives that we cannot escape, seemingly.
Well, the answer to the basic question is the solution will occur by improving individuals. By improving enough individuals, by getting enough individuals enlightened on what is occurring and how to fix those things, the group will get fixed. Without addressing these 5 points, addressing a group will not work.
Okay, so let me point out a problem with this line of thinking that it seems like there's a problem to me, is that a lot of people have taken on this responsibility of quote unquote exposing the truth. And we have some funky ass truths that people are quote unquote exposing. And it's happening all over. The fact that information has been democratized doesn't seem to be helpful. I hear people screaming on all kinds of media, and whereas years ago these people were confined to places like the Bowery.
This is true, but the 5 factors I'm talking about would be fairly recognizable to people. And again, you're making a very good point. It seems like anything goes on the web, and any kind of craziness can be pushed forward. But I'm talking about very simple and specific factors that address common sense and address what one could call, common sense would be the best term. So I'm going to tell you what fixing this depends on, and only one thing, and that is individuals being willing to take responsibility for it. The people in charge fell asleep at the wheel or were bought. It's as simple as that. I'm not even condemning them all.
Mm-hmm.
But there are going to be individuals, and I'm do not mean to sound pompous, although it may sound pompous. I, by myself, could fix this country if my communication skills were good enough. I have these 5 points of deterioration, or 5 points where our social fabric is being undermined. Each of these 5 points has a very elegant and simple solution that can be implemented without very much cost. And it's my job to communicate these things to as many individuals as I can.
So this is your stand, and this is your way of taking responsibility. We'll get to some of these solutions, not today.
Yeah.
But today you brought up one very specific thing that you seem to believe, and you're probably right, is the biggest factor, which is the amount of drugs and alcohol that are being pumped into our populace, and also the messaging of the people who are pumping them into us, right? So that seems to be the number one thing. Now, given human nature, given the fact that we need a break from the stress, that this is a seeming solution, and given the power and the money that's available for people kind of pushing these buttons and pushing these substances onto us, how do you address that? How do you address a problem that's seemingly so many degrees away from individuals?
Well, again, we're not going to get into the other 4 factors.
No, we're not.
But they do interlock.
Okay.
But a very smart person once said, when you're dealing with elephants in the room, how do you handle them? And his answer was, one at a time.
Yeah. You're familiar with the story about the boy on the beach and the starfish?
No.
So there was a beach that was just loaded with starfish that had washed up onto the shore. There were just thousands upon thousands of them. And so the boy was seen taking a starfish and throwing it into the ocean, and then taking another starfish and throwing it into the ocean. And someone came up to him, someone who was obviously much smarter and more mature, and said, how could you even hope to make a dent? Look at these hundreds of thousands of starfish. How does that matter? And the boy took another starfish, threw it into the ocean, said, well, it mattered to that one.
Right. So the crazy thing, David, is that I have this connection to the web right now. I have a modem, I have a computer, I have a camera, I have a microphone, and I have a connection to the World Wide Web. If my skill in communicating, if the quality of my communication is good enough, if I understand my audience well enough to communicate well to them, then I should be able to rehabilitate this country.
See, this is where you lose me. This is where you lose me, because I see all the static that's out there and all the noise, and how communication itself has been degraded and been lessened, and how little actual words and truth mean in the face of all that noise. And I'm like the older, more wise and mature person on the beach with the kid with the starfish.
Well, I'm going to fall back on my experience in dealing with individuals. And one of the key datums, one of the key points of technology in helping somebody is gaining accessibility. In other words, what will that person be willing to talk about? What is real to that person where they are? How do you enter a conversation with that person? And that is a skill. It's basically starting the communication.
I can tell you the answer.
Yeah.
It's very apparent to me that if you want to enter a conversation on a commonality these days, you start at the level of grievance and anger and fear. And that's what's being done. And so the people who are better communicators, they're not more eloquent. but they know how to tap into that. They
Okay,
know
so
how to tap into people's baser instincts. So if you want to go there, you're welcome. But how does that distinguish you from those people?
okay, so let me go right into it. Our families are under attack. Our social fabric is under attack. There are fault lines in our society, and it's being done. It's being done for money. It's being done for personal animosity. It's being done out of indifference. These things can be fixed. Don't stand for it. How's that for a grievance-related introduction? How'd that sound?
Start. It's a it's a good start. I mean, willingness for action, that's positive action. Let's call it positive action, right? Because we have certainly seen some negative action. That's a whole different story.
Okay, so I'm not the greatest orator. I'm not the greatest public speaker, but the fact remains that my ability to get this message out determines how much I can change society. So I am bound and determined at age 78 to get this message out. I did not define these 5 areas. Thank goodness somebody way smarter than me did it. I do know that they're clearly correct, nor did I develop the technology to improve those areas. And again, by observation, I see that they work beautifully. So all I have to do is communicate more effectively. And I may try to enlist you in helping me. I would like to enlist whoever's listening to help me. I'm very willing to send out some information on what the 5 factors are. And boy, do I need help. But the fact remains that our ability to communicate a sensible message will win the day.
Got it.
How's that?
Okay.
Do I sound like I'm standing on a big giant soapbox?
Listen, there's obviously a time for a soapbox. Like I said, we're in this odd age where a lot of people are standing on, proverbial soapboxes or metaphorical soapboxes. And as a result, good, correct, truthful messages are obscured. And that's part of the frustration, I'm sure, of everybody who wants to make things better and everyone who thinks they do have the solution. So
I would ask you to give me a half hour on some other time where I could delineate the 5 factors and see as a test to see if I can communicate them simply enough so that they make sense to an audience.
Fair enough. Okay, good. So I think that's a good point to end off. Gary, let's end off on a hopeful note.
Yeah.
I think we might have. But is there anything else you'd like to say in summary that is a more hopeful message? Put you on the spot.
The clock is ticking on my answering. I believe in the absolute goodness of individuals. I believe that for the most part, the population is composed of social beings that want to do well, that want those around them to do well. And that is a resource that is almost unkillable. And so that is what we're tapping into, the common sense and the goodness and the inherent decency of at least 80% of the population. And if we can tap into that and stop those who would attack those people, I think we can win the day.
Interesting. Okay, good. Again, I think that's a perfect note to end on. And we will speak again perhaps next week.
Okay.
All
Thanks
right.
for listening.
Take care. You got it. Bye, everyone. See you next week.